have to admit, I'm awfully afraid to review this one. Time Enough at Last is iconic, and has become, along with episodes like To Serve Man and The Eye of the Beholder, synonymous with the original Twilight Zone series. This is a big one to tackle, and I have a feeling that my prognosis of the episode will leave any hardcore fans a bit miffed at me. Oh well, let's keep on trucking. Time Enough at Last was directed by John Braham and written by Rod Serling, based on a short story by Lynn Venable. As the episode opens, we meet Henry Bemis, played by the one and only Burgess Meredith.
1, 2, 3, 4. Mrs. Chester, have you ever read David Copperfield?
How's that?
It's a wonderful book. It's this poor little fellow, his father has passed away, and his mother's married this miserable man called Murdstone. Isn't that a villainous name? Murdstone. Well, this Murdstone has a sister called Jane.
Mr. Bemis, you've shortchanged me again. You owe me $1 more. See? There's only 24 here, and there should be 25.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Chester. I thought there were 5 ones. There's only 4. I thought I'd given you 5. I'm terribly sorry. And then there's another very funny character here called Micawber, Mr. Micawber. And he's always being sent to debtor's prison. And then there's another wonderful character here called Peggotty. That is David's nurse.
Bemis comes off as a slightly aloof fellow who would rather spend his day with a book than a person. He's called into his boss's office and gets reamed out for reading on the job. Bemis explains that he does so because his wife Helen refuses to let him read at home. He's gotten so desperate that he's turned to reading condiment labels at the dinner table. We're never given a reason, but the manager applauds this action and remarks that his wife sounds like a very smart person. Did everyone hate books in this time period? We then transition to Bemis's home life, as we see his wife pull a newspaper from his hands and tell him that they're going to play cards with a neighbour. Bemis is reluctant, but says he'll be ready to go in a few minutes. After his wife leaves the room, we see him sneak a book from under his easy chair and slip it into his coat pocket. We're then treated to this scene, proving that Helen may be the biggest arsehole ever to be shown on film.
What's this?
What's that?
This?
Isn't that odd? Now, how did that get here?
I can only hazard a guess. A book of modern poetry. Yours, Henry? Would you like to read me some?
We'll read you some. Do you mean read you out loud out of the book?
Do you want to?
Oh, I would love to. No, there are some lovely things in here. There are 1 or 2 things from T.S. Eliot and Edmondson, Vincent Millay, Robert Frost, Carl Sandburg. Helen. Who did this, Helen?
Who do you think did it, Henry? You should thank me, really. A grown man who reads silly, ridiculous, nonsensical doggerel.
This isn't doggerel. There's some very beautiful things here.
I say it's doggerel. I also say it's a waste of time.
Helen! Helen, don't do that for Helen, please don't do that! Why, Helen? Why do you do these things?
Because I'm married to a fool.
I want to make this perfectly clear as we continue. Henry Bemis has committed no crimes, and his biggest character flaw is his hilariously oversized glasses. The universe seems to have just chosen him as the butt monkey of every cruel prank. I was so perplexed by this unnecessarily cruel scene, I paused the episode and debated just making up the ending. But I didn't, so let's keep going. We transition back to the bank that Bemis works at, presumably the next day. His lunch hour approaches, and he sneaks off to read a book and a newspaper in the bank vault. where he won't be disturbed. One of the articles he reads mentions the destructive power of the hydrogen bomb. Very subtle foreshadowing there, Serling. Does the newspaper have the twist ending too? Because that would save me like 10 minutes of my life. Anyways, we hear a huge explosion, and after Bemis is rocked from side to side, he emerges into a nightmare.
Seconds, minutes, hours. They crawl by on hands and knees for Mr. Henry Bemis, who looks for a spark in the ashes of a dead world. A telephone connected to nothingness. A neighborhood bar, a movie, a baseball diamond, a hardware store. The mailbox of what was once his house and is now a rubble. They lie at his feet as battered monuments to what was but is no more.
Helen! Helen! Where are you?
Mr. Henry Bemis on an 8-hour tour of a graveyard.
I will admit that Sterling's narration here is chilling and well delivered, but I also want to accentuate that Henry Bemis didn't stop and jump for joy. He didn't celebrate his awful wife perishing in an atomic blast. He wanders around terrified and desperate to find survivors. Just keep that in mind as we near the ending. We get scene after scene of Bemis wandering through rubble, collecting canned foods, and lamenting his terrible fate as the only survivor of a nuclear strike. He even picks up a gun and says he hopes he'll be forgiven for committing suicide, given the circumstances. Jeez Louise. Fortunately, we're spared the scene of Burgess Meredith blowing his brains out, as he notices that, miraculously, the town's public library is mostly still intact. He grows ecstatic as he finds that the library's contents have also survived, and celebrates that he'll have books to read for a long time to come. Keep in mind, he's still in a desolate and radioactive wasteland, so presumably he'll read until he dies a terrible death, but at least he has something to occupy his time. Then, this happens.
January, February, March, April, May, this year, the next year, and the year after, and the year after that, and the year after that. Ah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh. And the best thing, the very best thing of all, is there's time now. There's all the time I need and all the time I want. Time, time, time. Ah, there's time enough at last. That's not fair. That's not fair at all. There was time now. There was all the time I needed. That's not fair. That's not fair.
That's what we call a cruel twist of irony. The thing is, ironic twists can be very powerful under the right circumstances. They work really well when there is a sense that the character deserved it, or at least contributed in some way to their ultimate fate. In essence, it becomes karmic justice. There are dozens of episodes in this series that fit that bill, some of which are my personal favourites. Here, it fails utterly because Henry Bemis is a lovable guy who just wanted to read the book. Why did this guy deserve a fate worse than death? And why am I expected to like this episode? In an interview, Rod Serling himself named this episode as his favourite that he had written. Well, I can conclude that Serling hates books, and I can also conclude that Time Enough at Last is a cruel exercise in terrible things happening to good people. It escapes a 0 score because Burgess Meredith is a remarkably talented actor, and this could have been a fantastic episode if they had just made the main character unlikable. That's all they had to do to save it. So, in contrary to the internet, which seems to think this is an amazing story, I give Time Enough at Last a very generous 1 fedora.